Hi, I'm Dawn Puzzio. I'm a speech-language pathologist, and I'm also the creator of the StoryTree Method. And I've spent my life work giving people a voice, and now I'm helping people tell their stories. So I'm excited today to have a conversation about, how our family photos are much more than just memories. They help us bridge silence, connect with others very deeply, and heal our history. So I'm excited for you to be with us.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Online Prosperity Show. Whether you're watching or you're listening to the show, this is the number one place where we bring you the people, ideas, and stories that help you heal, grow, and build a life that actually feels good to live. Now, I'm your host, Prosper Taruvinga, and today's guest really solves a challenge that a lot of families silently face. This is the fading of their memories, fading of their relationships, and their stories. And if you've ever looked at a shoebox of thoughts and photos and thought, maybe one day I'll get around to sorting this out, I think today is that a day. Because joining us is the incredible Dawn Puzzio, who is the founder of Pixel Paper Curations and the creator of the StoryTree Method, and we're going to be hearing all about it. It's a 6-category framework that helps people transform photo chaos into healing, communication, connection, and legacy. Now, Dawn's journey goes from a childhood that was shaped by conditional love to now building what she has built, and it travels through building a 12-employee private practice to selling everything and rebuilding a life from a piece. And there's also parts that we're going to be experiencing where she really reconnects with an estranged mother through photos and discovering a completely new calling. Now, I could go on and talk about things that I'm not even qualified to talk about. Why don't we hear it from the horse's mouth? Now, Dawn, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you, Prosper? Great to be here.
Absolutely. Well, just having heard about what you've been through and what it is that you're helping people with, which is basically finding a voice in photos. That's something that I thought only AI can do, but seemingly you are doing that for people. So for those that are watching right now, if you're watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify or anywhere else, just make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on the stories that can actually help you create a life and a business full of connection and prosperity. Now, Dawn, you've been around the block, and obviously before you started your business, Pixel and Paper Curation, and the method that you're going to be telling us a little bit, you've actually lived in a home where communication meant survival. Paint us a picture of what that means and what that looked like.
Sure. Well, growing up, my parents, they didn't have a lot of resources. They left home very young, and my father was an alcoholic, and my mother was very controlling, and her role was to manage the experiences in our home. And she did that by trying to control emotions and people's actions. And so that meant ultimately that I had to do a lot of the emotional work for the family. So I carried a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. And, I had to really be the one that bore all of that, because there was nobody else with the emotional capacity to do that. And so that's, now I'm realizing, though, that, that's just their story. They didn't have the capacity to heal and to find themselves, really. So this is a generational thing. It's something that went on for many generations in both sides of the family. And, I'm excited to help stop it here.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they say the buck stops, with the one that chooses to stand up. And I think you're the one that has chosen to be that within the family. Now, just also having a look at what this would have looked like. Were there any siblings involved, and what was their sort of take in the whole grand scheme of things?
I have one sibling, and she's much, much younger than I. So, she's 10 years younger than me. So when I left home, she was, 7 or 8 years old. So it's just a very different experience. But, that was just, while I was growing up, I had a much younger sibling, and that was, a lot of responsibility, but, she was also my savior in terms of, having somebody else to share this with. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And also, you did mention that there was a lot of guilt and shame that you had to bear within that time. Would that have meant you moving around your society? People would maybe point fingers at you, or did you feel that?
No, this was silent. We lived in a very nice town, upper middle class. Everybody went to college. It really wasn't something that people knew about. And so that's what it was. It was a family secret. And so I had to, make sure that nobody knew it. And that left me very isolated and feeling like, I didn't really have the language to tell people about it because it was forbidden. Blood is thicker than water is what I was told. And so we should always keep it in the family. And that was why the shame was there, but it's also, we inherit shame, I mean, it's when it's a generational thing, there's just so much shame that just gets passed on and passed on. And, now I'm realizing I was holding all of this that really didn't belong to me. I was just kind of a pawn in the game,
But you did mention when your sister was 10, you left. Was that?
Yeah, well, I went to college. And, I really never moved back home. I came home for some vacations, but then as soon as I could, I stayed for summers. And, ultimately I went to graduate school there. And things happened, as I was finding my way at a young age in college and trying to get out on my own. My parents, they helped me, but like I said, in a very controlling way. And so, I was told never to spend my money that I made. And I had so many like little jobs here and there because I was a very responsible person. And when I had saved all of this money and I was told it was for a rainy day, then when I was a senior in college and I was about to go to graduate school, I came home for spring break and I saw that my mother had forged a check and took my entire life savings. And I was left to go to graduate school with nothing, I had to take out loans, but, that was the money for my rainy day, and my rainy day came and nobody was there. And, that left me with really a lifetime of, fear, fear that whatever I do have can be taken away. And, at the time, it really didn't even faze me because that's how often my, boundaries had been crossed. And so it was really later on in life that it hit me.
Absolutely. And
so much so that I even called the bank and I told them my story, and they researched it and found a copy of that check. They found like a microfiche copy and they sent it to me. So I have that check because I need to remember that.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing that bit with us. Now, you were in college. What were you studying?
Speech-language pathology. Yeah. And so I went to graduate school for speech-language pathology. And obviously when you're young and you're trying to choose what you want to do, I knew I wanted to help people because that's how I was conditioned. At a very young age, I helped everybody. I took care of everybody. And that's what kept me safe. And I still to this day enjoy helping people. So that's not a problem. It's just that, we do what we're kind of molded for. And that was something that I chose. But, I realized later in life that, not being able to communicate with my parents in an honest and authentic way is really ultimately what led to me being a speech language pathologist.
Absolutely. Now, for those that are not familiar with that sort of career path, could you just give us a glimpse into what a speech language pathologist does?
Sure. I mean, it's very varied depending on different populations. You can work with young infants all the way up through geriatric elderly populations. But basically, anybody that has a speech impairment, meaning like they have trouble pronouncing words for some reason, whether it's a neurological thing or it's just developmental in children, that's something that we work with. We work with things called language disorders, which is when you can't think of the words you want to say, or you don't really understand what people are saying very well for a variety of reasons. There's just so many things. We work with voice disorders. We work with stuttering. It really runs quite the gamut. And I've done a lot of it. I haven't done all of it, but I've done a lot of it. We work with autistic people. And that's, just such a blessing because there's just such a variety of experiences there. And right now I work in a school and I work with children, elementary age.
Absolutely. Now, you see, as human beings, we've evolved to who we are now because of our ability to communicate and be able to pass on messages in a way that helps us be, do, and have or grow in a certain way. Now, when somebody has that inability to communicate, what aspects of their life is not fulfilled, or where does it sort of, infringe on their existence?
Well, I mean, again, that can take many different forms as well, but I would say, it affects their ability to function in the community for sure. When you have strangers meeting you, if they're not familiar with how you speak, or it's a crowded, noisy environment, they're not really going to understand. And then that leads to what we call communication breakdown. So then you have to repair that, which is when you have to try to say it again or say it a different way or try to say it louder. And that's just very stressful. There's also, difficulties in families because of it, depending on the severity. But, when children cannot communicate, that's a very difficult thing, or adults too, when someone has a stroke or if they have dementia, that's, obviously a big impact, and that affects quality of life for sure.
Absolutely. Now, the reason why I brought us here, Dawn, is so that we can look at it at a lens of, yes, there are some physical, impediments that are affecting people, which obviously people like yourself are there to solve. But you were going through the same, but at an emotional sort of level where you couldn't speak or communicate or bring about any of the, like you've mentioned, guilt and shame and things of that nature. Would you then say you literally have been studying communication your whole life?
Yeah, I very much have. And because I grew up the way I did, I can, I think I have a superpower where I can walk in a room and read somebody's mood. I can sense how somebody feels, because that's what kept me safe, to know, how people around me were feeling and how I should react to that. So that's something that, we communicate a lot, not verbally, but non-verbally, right? So I've been studying that form of communication for a very long time.
Absolutely. And obviously it would have placed you in the right place for you to actually have that empathy of knowing that sometimes people really have lots to say, but they sometimes physically can't or mentally cannot, based on the circumstances that they're going through. Now, you also had an early emotional regulation role, because anybody in your position would have exploded somehow, some way, being in such, an environment. Would you also say that has put you front and center to be able to have that empathy when it comes to people that you're dealing with, especially in the role that you're in right now?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely see, I see when people are suffering. And, I mean, it's not 100%, but I just, I can sense some of that. And my heart goes out to people, and if I can help in any way, I will. But a lot of times, this is the life we're living, and you can't intervene, but you can extend yourself and show people that you're there. And that does make a difference.
Okay. So you managed to escape, you managed to start off afresh by yourself, but the tentacles of what was still kept their grip. Now, you did express the betrayal from your mom, which obviously that is something that for somebody who needs to be protecting you does that to you. And I would think that completely changed the way you probably saw yourself as well. And
yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, so maybe you can walk us through, how that set you up now to the path and the journey that you're on right now.
Sure. At the time, like I said, when it happened, it didn't even strike me as being such a terrible thing, because I was very used to that kind of treatment. And I really did love my parents. I really wanted to believe that they loved me. And, I did a lot to please them throughout my life. And that's pretty much what kept me on track. When you said some people wouldn't have been able to tolerate all of this. And, what always kept me going was just that, maybe if I do something better, they'll love me more. And that was just always what drove me. And, I kept in touch with them as well as I could, but over time it wasn't possible because it was just so abusive. And that's just part of the way it is, and when it comes to, the money that she stole, it represented so much. And as I got older and needed more money for more things, more real big things like, a house, a family, whatever, all those things. And I really saw the value of what had been taken from me. That's when it really became something I couldn't ignore anymore.
Oh, absolutely. Because, some kids have stepping stones from their parents, yet, you didn't have that, so to speak. But you went on and built something amazing. Walk us through your 12-piece, practice that you created.
Yeah. So I had it started off with, I was driving around doing what we call home care, where you go into people's homes and you start, working with people that way. And I, developed a really good clientele that way. And I knew a lot of people, and, people started saying, why don't you hire more people? And then you could serve more people, and it was all about, I want to be there for everybody. And that's for someone like me, that was just kind of like all I needed to hear. Well, of course, then I have to do that. That's my job, And so I took that on and developed, a pretty big clinic where we had physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy. And we were able to see a lot of people in the community, a lot of children. It was a pediatric clinic, and it was great. But nobody got to see the difficult times, the financial struggles, the difficulties in running a business, and the stress that was involved. And, it was New York City. And so if there were a couple of snow days, then that meant we didn't get paid for a couple of days. And those things were just, they made for difficult months, So one day, it was just one of those things where I realized prosperity isn't just volume, it's impact, and I realized that I could use my whole career to actually help people. And, I don't have to serve everybody, I can have a lot of impact with one person. I can have a lot of impact in whatever I do, but it doesn't necessarily mean I have to serve the entire community. And I think that was just part of my people pleasing and part of my feeling like I have to fill a void, I have to fill a need that's there in the community. And ultimately, we just needed to to leave that.
Absolutely. Because from what I hear from a lot of people that I speak to, Dawn, people that are coming from families that are not really supporting will find and build tribes around them, that will then become their supporting arm, and they will do anything to maintain that because that's pretty much all they have. Now, you realized at some point that this was a nice to have, but it was not sustainable. Was there a particular moment when you realized, okay, I think this is something that I need to do? Because from there, you literally sold everything off, right?
Yeah. So my husband had left his job to help me run the business. And so that had been difficult as well, because now the entire business is our only financial, income, our only money stream. So one morning we were sitting at the table, talking about business over breakfast, and it was a stressful day, another one. And, there were times where he might be a little discouraged and I would have to, be, positive. And then there were times where I would be discouraged and he would be positive. But this time I was just really feeling like this is not going to work. And at the same time, then I thought, well, I'm not going to say anything because it's just going to be another, like, we can do this, just work harder, and he just looked at me and said, what if we just moved? What if we just left? And I said, that's great. And so I think that night or the next night, we had a realtor come over and, assess our house. And that was in September. And then by June, the last day of school, we picked up the kids and we were gone. We had sold our house, we had sold our business, and we had purchased a new house already. And we were delighted. I needed to find some peace because all this time I had never found peace because I kept running, I kept doing and performing and people pleasing. And losing myself in the process. When you lose yourself, there's really no North Star to guide you, because you're just going in whatever whimsical pattern, people are directing you, and that's really what happened.
I can imagine. And during all this time, do you feel like you still kept or maintained that suppression in yourself that you had before of whatever guilt or shame or whatever feelings that would have been coming as a result of trying to sustain all of this beautiful cage that you had built yourself around?
Right, exactly. And that is what happened. Yes, I did have peace and my life was very good when we moved. I was able to spend a lot more time with my family and have great experiences for my children growing up. But, finding yourself, is not for the faint of heart, and it took me quite a long time to really work on that, because when you're, in the midst of it all, it's not as accessible as you might think.
Now, Dawn, they say wherever you are, there you are. Okay, no matter how far you go away, you still the same Dawn Puzzio. You still have the same memories. You still have the same person. What was day one in your newfound environment? Or just give us a glimpse of how you then went on and started that healing journey, because you could have moved, left everything behind, but all of those things come along with you.
Right. They just follow you, and they did follow me. And, just to back up a little bit, early on when I did have the business, I had gotten into a big argument with my parents on the phone. And during one time when we were communicating, like I said, we would go many years without communicating, but this happened to be a time when we were. And we had such a big argument. And after that, I said, we can't have this in our home, and in my mind, I'm not kidding, I put it all in a box and I wrapped it up, put a ribbon on it, and put it on the shelf. And I really thought getting rid of that was going to fix everything. But, you know, like you said, there you are, right? You know, like, I mean, I'm still me, and, you know, I have a lot of things that I need to work on. And, you know, it comes over time. It really does. But, you know, when you first introduce peace into your life, then you have the space. You have the space to work on it, and, you know, the quiet to work on it. But the noisier life is, and the more you fill it with other people's wishes, then you're further away from yourself.
You also did sort of paint a picture of your husband, you know, coming into the show. He sounds like a very supportive man in this whole scenario, because we're dealing with somebody who's coming from whatever past they have, and all of a sudden they now have to deal with that and everything else that comes along with it. You know, what was his role in this whole transition? And, you know,
well, a part of the genesis of us moving was so that we could, you know, both work in schools and have, you know, a nice life, you know, quiet, you know, easier work hours, more time with our family. And that's what happened. And so, yeah, that's, you know, we've always had those values. And unfortunately, I tried to do everything at the same time, which was to have all of that, plus please everybody else around me, which was like work harder. And so there were all these competing interests that didn't serve me or anybody else, honestly. But yeah, he's been fantastic. And sometimes I actually just said to him recently, what is it like to be married to me? Is it like being married to 4 people? Because that's what it feels like. And he laughed.
Well, I can imagine, you know, because at the end of the day, you know, that's who he chose, and that's what, you know, is on the cards. Now, obviously, you went on a journey. You were trying to regain, like you said, your peace, yourself, and things of that nature. Just walk us through what then, and you know, after that.
Yeah. Well, I'm just trying to think of the sequence, but my mother, well, my father had passed away about 10 years ago, and we weren't speaking. I did speak to him the day he passed away on the phone, but I hadn't talked to him 9 years before that. So, you know, it's heartbreaking, but it's not my heartbreak. You know, I did everything I could to make it work, and it just was the way it was. This was at a time when the language of estrangement really was taboo. You know, now I think people talk more about it. But I really felt a lot of pressure from society about, but they're your parents. And, you know, I'm grateful now that that language has changed, and that, you know, people, you know, feel less like that, you know, that they can have that voice. But, you know, so he passed away. And in that time, I reunited with my mother out of, you know, obligation and feeling like this could be a fresh start for us. Like maybe it was my dad's alcoholism that had made her behave the way she did. I don't know. This was my hope, you know, my hope that this was all just a dream. And, you know, we reconnected, and she, you know, she did what she, you know, could, and she tried to make it nice. So I thought, okay, well, everything's good. And so she moved here to be closer to me and my sister. And in that time, I realized that I had been cut out of the will. And not that it's about money, but, you know, to see your name like erased from the family when you are the one that really, you know, bore the brunt of a lot of things and really carried a lot to help the family, that is just devastating. And so when I realized that, you know, she tried to appease me and say, but I put you back in, you know, because once we were back together, she went and put me back in. Now, granted, you have to pay a lot of money every time you amend a will. So like, this is not cheap. So she paid money to extract me from the will, and then she paid money to put me back in the will. And that still didn't sit well with me. And so for about like 8 months or so, I really tried, to, kind of give her that, I don't know, forgiveness. But it just wasn't, I just couldn't, I don't, I thought it was maybe my limitation, but honestly, I mean, that's a lot to digest. And I was telling her that I couldn't, I can't get past this. And she said, well, it was your dad's idea. He never really liked you anyway. And that was it. I said goodbye. And that was it. I could not, I mean, this is just what went on forever. This was like nothing had changed. All the nice parts are just facades. And so I walked away. And then I get a phone call about, I don't know, a year late. I can't remember the time period, but it was like a year later. I got a phone call from a doctor saying that he was calling about my mother. And I was not her contact, because of all this. And so I thought it was strange that he was calling me, but I had been a contact at one point, like an emergency contact. So I guess he had like an old medical record, and he was telling me that she lives in a memory facility where, people with dementia live because they, are unable to take care of themselves. And I was just shocked, I didn't realize that, she had gotten that bad. I just didn't know, but I really thought about it after that phone call and thought, there's a reason I got that phone call. And this is a chance for me, for me to not do something for her so much as it is just for me to know that, I'm going to seek this out and see what happens with, knowing everything I know. And so I did. I went there, and I went there every week, for the rest of her time there. And that's what I did. I picked up the photos. She was unable to really speak clearly. She had a few words, but she recognized me. She knew who I was and cried. And honestly, a little while later, before she passed away, I realized that she disinherited me again. So yeah, but that's the story, and when people don't have the capacity to love, it's very dangerous. But it wasn't about the money, like I said, it was about, just the overall conditional love, if you want to call it love. It was, you're in, you're out, you're in, you're out. So, yeah. Did that answer your question?
You're right, Dawn. I mean, for me, I'm just, and obviously things like this happen, and you're telling the story, mm-hmm. which obviously is, but half of it is just incredible that you would maybe, give birth to this child that you decide whether or not they eat tonight, just based on your feelings at that particular moment. You know what I mean? It's just, yeah. This is just,
well, you touched on it because you said, like, this happens, other people experience this, and I'm so grateful just to be here speaking with this, with you about this, because this does happen. And when people can see it as not being normal, but it's not something to be ashamed of, and it's not something that's anybody's fault. It's, whatever happened to parents who have done these things, has had to be horrific as well. So, I mean, honestly, when I took out those photos and I started, just looking at them with her, just as something to kind of, our relationship was very heavy, obviously, from all of that. And so we didn't have a lot in common that we could really engage with. And so looking at the photos primarily of her when she was very young, was sort of helpful. And when I saw a picture of her as a young girl, and I realized, wow, she's just a hurt young girl herself. And when she left home, she was about 16, 17 years old. And that's probably her emotional development. That was the max that she reached. Mm-hmm. So she, like I said, didn't have the capacity.
Absolutely. And it takes a a different type of person to contain all of this and still want to share those sort of preserved memories. And from what you're saying, this is memories of her at an age where she probably thought she was, in the right sort of space. But what was it about those photos that then allowed you, because you'd walked away 3 or 4 times in this whole, escapade, but it allowed you to bypass the pain, the rejection, and then finally open up to communicate again?
Yeah, I think looking at those photos and seeing, how difficult it was for her to speak in general, but then, to see her light up and to see her, try to communicate over them was more than I was getting without them. And so I saw that as this is not a fluke, this is something real here, especially knowing what I know about communication. And I mean, honestly, even if, she just reached out and touched my arm when she saw a specific photo, like that's communication, like something clicked with her there. And, I had to honor that, even though it's my mother, and she was, finding some way to share a moment with me, a present moment, which is more than we had. We didn't have a good history, so there was nothing we could really reminisce about that was going to be very positive. But sharing a present moment where she could look at something that made her happy, then I felt like, I'm here and I'm sharing this and it's not hard for me. And just getting to experience that was positive. And I did inherit a bunch of her photos and I, have looked at them since. And that's really what started me going with this StoryTree method, because it really made me process a lot of things as well. And to see that, photos hold a lot of meaning, it looks like, wow, that was just a beach trip. There's a lot more going on than just a beach trip. Who's there? What time of day is it? What happened before and after that photo was taken? What else happened on that trip? And there are stories. There's lots of stories, great stories and not so great stories, but they're there.
Obviously, a lot of people would just think a photo can't heal trauma. It can't. It just brings back bad memories and things of that nature. What would you say to people that are not looking at it in the way that you felt or saw in that particular hurt goal photo, that you experienced with your mom?
Yeah. Well, that particular photo, that was like a random thing. And how we have thoughts that randomly happen, that, that was my experience on that day at that moment. But, the StoryTree method really goes through 6 ways of sorting your pictures and your photos. And like one of them is a story tree, a tree, right? So there's the canopy of the tree, and that's all your, the great things that have happened, vacations, birthdays, all of that, and then there's the roots, which is your heritage. So maybe distant relatives and maybe your first home, that kind of thing. After that would be seeds. So those are hidden stories. And then there is also the forest, which is the community. But then the most interesting one that I think people respond to is the fallen leaves. And that's, where there's loss, grief, and resilience. And I think packaging it like that into those 3 words really makes you see, yes, that was a photo that brings back some bad things, but the resilience that it took to be standing here looking at that photo, whether it was from the people in the photo that had that resilience or it's yourself, that's powerful, because there's really no way to see that without seeing the photo. We have a lot going on in our minds, but, without really looking at something to trigger a thought, sometimes we don't really access that.
You see, in the world we live in today, we're taking a lot of photos. Like, I just came off a Disney cruise with my girls, and I think I have over 500 photos that I still have to sort through, because some of them were impulse, some of them were staged, some of them were all of that stuff and things of that nature. Now, all of that, we are obviously taking more photos, but sharing fewer stories and everything is just going up to some cloud. Right now, I'm looking out, it's overcast. I don't know which cloud has got any of my data and all. So how does the StoryTree method move beyond photo chaos to actually start creating that legacy and the connection that you're talking about?
Right. Well, in this method, it's about curating, right? So archiving is really just organizing data, but curating is preserving meaning. So you really need to start by being able to sort what has meaning and what does not have meaning. So in those six, parts of the system, there's also a bin for garbage. Anything that's a duplicate, anything that's, a scene without a person or, anything relevant in it, we don't need it. We don't need another sunset. We don't need another, beach photo of the waves. So there's that, and I think moving forward, the important thing is also just to start changing our habits, our habits of collecting so many photos. It's leaving us, with a rootless generation, where our children are not even going to know the stories, because back in the day, there was times where we would sit around with our photo albums, our slideshows, our home movies, and it would be a Friday night with popcorn and people would play games and look at all this stuff and share stories. That doesn't happen anymore because our world is too busy and we have way too much data. And by having all of that, and we have access to so much, we're only having the data and not the stories, and that's kind of a sad thing in my mind, because stories are healing, stories are powerful, and they also can help build a family. You can really get a lot out of knowing your legacy and passing that along. So that's an important concept for sure.
I come across a lot of people that feel empty because nobody has told them how great they are. Is this somewhat of you getting somebody to go through who they've been and what they've come across and who they're connected with to really show them the essence of how awesome they are? Because the world we live in right now is just relegating people to be some sort of a number. Just, are you a social media follower or are you a social media creator and things of that nature? Whereas we've got a rich tapestry behind. Like if I didn't sit down with you and just met you for coffee or whatever, I would have just gotten the surface level of the stuff that you're doing now without the depth of who you've been and what you've overcome.
Well, I think human connection is the essence of it all, right? So, when we're just measuring ourselves based on, all these other falsehoods and these unimportant things, then of course we're going to feel empty and disconnected because everybody's making sure that, they're up to par too. And so, people focus on themselves more than other people. So that's naturally going to happen. But, I just read something before where someone was complaining about all this like self-checkout and, automated fast food. There's never like a person to help you anymore. And, that person was just saying, I just want to talk to a person. And yeah, that's how we're designed. And so when it comes to family legacy, that's like, there's nothing more important, always hear stories about people like maybe not having a lot of money, but they were rich in their family. They had a great experience and lots of stories and lots of love shared. And that's really the most valuable thing. So without those things, we really lack identity, and self-esteem. And this happens in children, when they don't know their story and they don't know where they've come from. They definitely are not showing the resiliency that, if they saw someone in their family be resilient and heard a story about how they bounce back from something, that's meaningful. But without that, they just, think that they're just themselves without any kind of support.
Now, Dawn, when you obviously were going through what you went through, you were dealing with it by yourself, and yes, you did maybe have a support network and things of that nature. And when you then found the peace, anybody in their right frame of mind would have been sitting there and saying, you know what, I've done my part. Now let me enjoy the peace that I have. But you went on and you started sharing this, and now you work with dementia caregivers, trauma survivors, and new families and things of that nature. Now, first of all, how does your work change maybe the communication in each of these groups, and how is it bringing people together, and why you and why now?
Well, why now? I mean, I think it's a few things that have come together. You know, my children are older, and so I definitely have more free time and more energy for that. But I think it also came at a time in my healing where I felt like, you know, this is an important message, you know, and why not share it? Because I can't just keep this nugget to myself, you know. But when it comes to, you know, dementia caregivers, you know, what I went through with my mom to see her communicate, you know, I would love to give that gift to somebody who had a good relationship with their mother or a father or whoever, and, you know, they could preserve that. There wasn't a lot for me to preserve, but, you know, as a speech pathologist, it was meaningful for me to see that I could access that communication and see that she did remember certain things that I wasn't really sure if she did. So that's, you know, that's the healing part. I mean, in terms of like new families, you know, doing this to purposely curate a legacy from the beginning is the key, you know, to teach people that you don't need 5,000 photos of one thing, one trip, or one, you know, holiday, because that is only going to, I guess, clog up all of, you know, the pictures that you have on your roll. And when that happens, it just becomes insurmountable. So that's one thing, is just to, from the very beginning, curate the photos and create a legacy that you want. You know, as you're going through, are we living the life and having the meaning that we intend to? Because a lot of people start off with the right intentions, but life gets busy, and so we don't really have the, you know, ability to just keep going and keep on track. So, and then healing. I mean, I found healing just by looking at, you know, pictures of my mother when she was young, and looking at pictures of me when I was young, and seeing what I had gone through. And, you know, it really took me until, you know, this part of my life to see, you know, all that had happened, and to be able to put it in perspective.
And also just talking about, you know, your journey and how you've come to where you are. You just didn't think of this when you started seeing these photos. I mean, 25 years ago, so you actually helped homeless patient. I don't know if we can talk about this, but you helped them write a letter, you know, and this literally reunited them with their only relative in Ireland. It's
Yeah.
also a very difficult thing for me to understand. For somebody who didn't have that, you still had the empathy to want to do that for somebody. Now, would they be a connection with that incident to the legacy work that you're now doing now, just really bringing people back to themselves and giving them back the gift that you never had to really experience until later on?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like my life's work. You know, I've always been very interested in genealogy and all of this kind of thing without really knowing why. I just thought had this just really strange interest. And I mean, I never really did that much with it, but it's always raised my curiosity, and I've, you know, explored a little bit. But, you know, when it comes to people finding their families and connecting, yeah, it's obviously something that I didn't have, and, you know, want so much for people to experience. So that's, you know, this man that I had worked with, you know, he had a head injury and he was homeless. And so, you know, I worked with him every day. That was what my job was. And in that time together, it was about 6 weeks or so, he told me that he had one relative in Ireland. And so I said, would you like to get in touch? Because you're really having a difficult time on your own. And so he said yes. And we wrote a letter together and I mailed it. And I met her in the lobby when she flew in and brought her upstairs to meet him. And, that's great stuff. I don't know how it all turned out, but, you got to take a chance,
Oh, absolutely. And I'm going to say this with utmost love and respect, Dawn.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in life, we're here to live, to learn, and to contribute. And obviously, in order for us to do any of those, for us to live the life, we have to go through the experiences and actually have the receipts so that when we then learn what we needed to be in those situations, it will be easy for us to contribute. And in your scenario, you live the life of somebody who obviously had the rejection story to tell, had the experience of your money being taken away from you by your loved ones, with your boundaries being, infringed upon, and everything else that happened around that. But you learned to actually give much more than what you received in that particular time. How many times did you have to go and, you give forgiveness to your parents, no matter what they had done? Yours was unconditional. And now you're contributing this to other people that have never been able to see this and acknowledge it and work with it. And I think you do it in the stages: the heal, the build, the bridge, and work that you're doing now. So why would you say that, knowing the stage that you're in this formidable journey of understanding yourself, is very, very important, so that they know where to start in order to jump onto the next phase?
I think I looked at all of this as just a journey, and I had an idea, and then I put it together. Excuse me. I put it together, and then I thought, wow, this could help people. And then I explored that. And I've just been putting one foot in front of the other through this process. It's not like I had an end in mind. I have no, this is not like a prescribed plan that I had. It just came, and I feel like it's a message that has to be told, or, at least gifted. And whether people want to receive it or not is obviously, up to them. But I really feel that it's powerful. And so because of that, I'm just taking a lot of chances. I'm normally quite an introvert. And so for me to be here with you today is just a miracle.
Well, I do thank you so much. I mean, if we caught you at a certain time, like you said, you had a vow to silence. You wouldn't have told us any of this. So there's a lot of
absolutely
work that has happened, and the journey is very, very present. Now, for those that are now intrigued as to what they can do to heal or build or bridge whatever relationships or stages that they might be in their journey, how can they maybe get a hold of you, or where can they start?
Sure. I mean, I would say my website is probably the best place to see exactly what it is that I'm doing and to get in touch. And that is Pixel and Paper Curations.com. So you can find everything there. And I also have a StoryTree journal starter kit that I'm offering. So feel free to, grab that from the website as well. I have some books coming out. I have More Than a Memory, which is for dementia caregivers, and how to use photos to access memory and communication. And then my journal will be coming out soon as well. And then I have other things down the pike that I'm planning on, to help people that need to heal more, as well as build a legacy. So that's all on the website as well.
Absolutely. I'll definitely make sure that all those links are in the show notes below, so that people can actually start activating, their journeys, towards creating these memories, and also just moving beyond photo chaos, like you say, to actually create a legacy of a connection. Now, Dawn, you've introduced us to a Dawn in so many different scenarios and so many different ages and places and experiences. Now, the one that really touched me the most is the one that discovered they had not been placed in the will, and yet they decided, that it is what it is. All right. Now, you did say you walked away from your mom a couple of times in all of those scenarios. In that particular version of you, while you're walking away, you're still being angry and you just don't understand why this is happening to you. If you would come across that Dawn in the hallway and they'll tell you their story, what would you tell her, knowing what you know now about life and who you've become?
Well, I mean, that it really wasn't about me to begin with, that all of this was just a big plan that was so much bigger than me. And, one time I had seen something like a visual of somebody that's trying to protect their children from generational trauma. And so it was like someone in front of a bus that's like coming down a hill and people are like flying out of the bus, but and her kids are just trying to walk by, so she's just trying to protect her kids from all of this going on. And that's what all of that was, it wasn't mine, and so it was unfortunate that, I was part of this puzzle that, I didn't ask to be part of. And it didn't matter if it was me or somebody else. So at some point I had to just remove the fact that, this was personal. I mean, obviously it was personal, very personal, but if I'm making any sense, it really, it had to happen to somebody because they need somebody to blame for their actions. And so I was that person.
So from what
that takes time.
Absolutely. And from what I'm hearing, Dawn, here is obviously life is not happening to you, but it's actually happening for you is what would have been happening. Because had this all not happened, the books you're talking about, the StoryTree Method, everything else that then happened wouldn't have happened to you. And obviously you wouldn't have, like you said, been on the Online Prosperity Show today because you wouldn't have had a good story to tell.
That's right. Or I would have been too scared because, fear was a big part of my life for a very long time. So now it's time to just start living and we don't need to be fearful.
Absolutely. Well, you've already mentioned books and things that we can also be excited about. But what's next? What are you working on right now? Now that you've brought us into your world, curated for us, please.
Yeah. Well, right now I'm, just trying to work on my book and working on that publishing aspect of it. And then I have that StoryTree journal, which is a really great way to complete the narratives that go along with the photos, because that's where the stories happen and the magic is captured, right? So it has a really good way of correlating the picture with the written work that's there so that the stories are captured and the legacy is protected. So that's a really important part of the work.
Absolutely. You know what, Dawn? You had done so well. We had just concluded your episode and everything else, but you went on and committed the biggest crime on the Online Prosperity Show.
What's that?
Well, you did mention you're writing a book, but you didn't pledge that you're going to have to come back and launch it with us. So you've got 2 seconds to redeem yourself there, Dawn.
Well, then I will absolutely promise to come back and launch it with you. See, this is not something I'm designed to do, but I'm trying. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. I really appreciate your time today. I mean, your life story and your experience have so much for a lot of people that are going through stuff. And as we've established, this is probably happening to a lot of people, but they don't have the words for it. And I feel like you've given us the permission or just tapped us on the shoulder to say, hey, you too can and have a happier existence. You just need to have a story around that. So thank you so much for having gone through the journey and sharing it with us today on the Online Prosperity Show, Dawn.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Now, for those that are watching, you can tell that her journey reminds us that healing just doesn't start with a perfect childhood. It actually starts with a brave decision to rewrite that story. And for anybody who's watching right now and feel like maybe their memories are scattered or their voice has been lost, or maybe just their family history is slipping away, I encourage you to go and check out the StoryTree Journal Discovery Kit at Pixel and Paper Curations.com. I will make sure that those links are in the show notes below. It just might be the first step towards reframing your past and also reclaiming your own legacy. And for those that are actually watching this, thank you. I mean, obviously, for tuning to the online prosperity show. But if this episode touched you, I also encourage you to maybe share it with somebody who needs hope, healing, or just a reminder that a connection is more powerful than memory. They will definitely thank you for having shown them and given them like what Dawn has, the words to express what it is that they're going through. As she has also said, back in the time, you always had to just deal with what came your way because we hadn't found the words for it. And I think this episode really gives us that vocabulary. So thank you so much for tuning in to the Online Prosperity Show. And as always, subscribe and leave a comment or just tell us what your journey looks like right now. At what stage are you? Are you in the healing stage or are you and the figuring it out stage? Just let us know in the comments below. Dawn will also be checking out who is responding to this. But until next time, I hope you keep creating and curating your family history so you can move beyond that photo chaos and curate a legacy of connection. Bye for now.